September 20th, 1944. A German command post overlooking the Waal River. The air is cool, thick with the smell of damp earth and distant cordite. Through powerful Zeiss binoculars, the scene is deceptively calm. The river, a wide gray ribbon, separates the Allied advance from the heart of the Reich. Spanning it is the prize, the massive Nijmegen road bridge, held securely by German machine guns and 80-mm cannons dug into the northern bank. Reports confirm the enemy's plan. American paratroopers are preparing to cross, not under the cover of darkness, but in broad daylight. Their assault craft are not armored landing barges, but flimsy canvas boats. Inside the command post, the assessment is swift and unanimous. It is a suicidal gesture, a desperate, foolish act born of failure. Low, confident laughter is shared among the officers. They are witnessing the death throes of a failed airborne operation. For the men on the far bank, desperation was a weapon the German generals had failed to account for. That desperation was forged in the crucible of a plan born from both triumph and crisis. Summer 1944. The Allied war machine, unshackled from the hedgerows of Normandy, thundered across France. Paris was free. Brussels fell. The German 7th Army was a shattered wreck, fleeing for the safety of the Reich. The advance was so swift, so overwhelming, it was dubbed the Great Swan. Optimism surged through the Allied ranks. The war, it seemed, was nearly won. But this lightning advance came at a cost. The supply lines, the arteries of war, were stretched to the breaking point. A single Sherman tank consumed a gallon of fuel for every 4 miles. An army consumed millions. The ports of Normandy were too far behind. The great port of Antwerp, though captured on September 4th, was useless. Its 50-mile-long estuary, the Scheldt, remained choked by stubborn German garrisons, rendering the port a dead end. The Allied armies were beginning to run out of everything. The Great Swan was grinding to a halt. From this logistical paralysis, a debate raged in the Allied High Command. A choice between two futures. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, favored a methodical, broad-front advance, a relentless, grinding push along the entire line. But British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery offered a more seductive alternative, a single, decisive blow. A narrow thrust of overwhelming power to pierce the German defenses, leap the Rhine River, and end the war by Christmas. Montgomery's vision won the day. The gamble was given a name: Operation Market Garden. It was audacious, elegant, and breathtakingly dangerous. It would be a battle fought in 2 parts, a symphony of air and armor, scheduled to begin on September 17th. Market was the air. The largest airborne assault in history. 3 entire divisions, over 34,000 men, would drop from the sky deep inside the occupied Netherlands. Their mission, to lay an airborne carpet by seizing a series of vital bridges over the canals and rivers that fragmented the Dutch landscape. Garden was the ground. The British XXX Corps, a massive armored spearhead led by Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, would race north along a single narrow road. They would cross the bridges secured by the paratroopers, covering 64 miles in just 2 days. Their final destination, Arnhem and the last great bridge over the lower Rhine. Success meant outflanking Germany's formidable Siegfried Line and opening a direct path into the industrial heartland of the Ruhr. The plan was a chain, each link representing a bridge. The American 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, would take the first set of bridges around Eindhoven. Further north, the American 82nd Airborne, the All-Americans, drew the critical crossings at Grave and Nijmegen. At the farthest point, the tip of the spear, the British 1st Airborne, the Red Devils, would seize the ultimate prize at Arnhem. The entire operation rested on a single vital assumption: that the enemy was beaten, disorganized, incapable of a coherent response. Allied intelligence painted a picture of old men and young boys guarding the Dutch bridges. But intelligence was wrong. The Master of Defense, Field Marshal Walter Model, had just established his headquarters near Arnhem. And by a fatal stroke of luck for the Germans, the elite Decenu SS Panzer Corps, the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions, were refitting in the very woods the British were set to land in. The 82nd Airborne Division, commanded by the aggressive Major General James Gavin, drew one of the toughest assignments, the sprawling Groesbeek Heights overlooking the German border and two crucial bridges. One over the Maas River at Grave, and the other, the colossal steel giant spanning the Wall at Nijmegen. Gavin's plan for D-Day, September 17th, was dictated by his orders. The primary objective was not the bridges, but the terrain. He had to seize and hold the Groesbeek Heights, a long wooded ridge dominating the landscape. This ridge was the key. It overlooked the single road XXX Corps would use, and it formed a natural barrier against German counterattacks from the nearby Reichswald forest. Losing the heights meant the failure of the entire operation. The bridges were secondary. The initial hours were a textbook success. The drop was nearly perfect. Thousands of paratroopers descended under clear blue skies, a sight that stunned Dutch civilians and German soldiers alike. One of Gavin's regiments, the 504th Parachute Infantry, under Colonel Reuben Tucker, executed a flawless coup de main, seizing the massive 11-span bridge at Grave before the Germans could react. Other units captured crucial canal bridges. The southern part of the 82nd sector was secure. The airborne carpet was being laid, but at Nijmegen, the plan faltered. The 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, tasked with taking the city and its vital road bridge, was stretched thin. A portion of the regiment had to drop miles away to help secure the Groesbeek Heights. Their assault on the city was delayed, fragmented. That delay was fatal. The German response here was not one of old men and boys. It was swift, professional, and brutal. Elements of the 10th SS Panzer Division, commanded by the determined SS Brigade Führer Heinz Harmel, were rushed into the city. They understood the bridge's value instantly. When the 508th finally pushed towards the bridge, they ran into a wall of fire. The Germans had turned the southern approach into a fortress of interlocking machine gun nests and anti-tank positions. The paratroopers' first attempt to rush the bridge was cut to pieces. The prize was in sight, a tantalizing few hundred yards away, but it was unreachable. The Germans controlled both ends, and critically, they had wired the entire structure for demolition. For the next 48 hours, a savage battle bled through the streets of Nijmegen. The paratroopers fought house to house, clearing buildings, pushing the Germans back block by agonizing block. All the while, on the Groesbeek Heights, their comrades fought desperately to repel determined German counterattacks. The 82nd was fighting two separate vicious battles, and the clock was ticking. Every hour of delay was a death sentence for the British paratroopers trapped in Arnhem. On the afternoon of September 19th, the ground element finally arrived. The lead tanks of the British Grenadier Guards, the vanguard of XXX Corps, rumbled into the outskirts of Nijmegen, linking up with the exhausted American paratroopers. It should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it was a moment of stark realization. The situation had not changed. The bridge remained a fortress. The British tankers could see the German 80mm guns on the far bank, their long barrels aimed directly down the southern ramp. A frontal assault by tanks would be suicide. The column of armor, the Great Garden spearhead, came to a dead stop. The entire Allied advance was now bottlenecked at the southern end of the Nijmegen Bridge. With Arnhem burning, Lieutenant General Horrocks and Major General Gavin knew a new plan was needed. A frontal assault was impossible. Waiting was not an option. The only way to take the bridge was to attack it from both sides at once. To get to the other side, they would have to cross the river, the wide, fast-flowing Wall. The idea was born of pure desperation. There were no proper assault craft. The only equipment available belonged to the British XXX Corps engineers, 26 small, flimsy canvas and plywood boats. They were just over 19 feet long, designed for ferrying troops across calm streams, not for a daylight amphibious assault across a 500-yard-wide river into the teeth of prepared enemy defenses. The paratroopers who would paddle them had no training for such an operation. They would be completely exposed to machine guns, mortars, and 20mm cannons. The plan was set, a desperate solution to a desperate problem, pitting determined men in canvas boats against fortified machine guns and cannons. The men chosen for this task were not assault boat specialists. They were not Marines. They were the paratroopers of Major Julian Cook's 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. For 3 days, they had been in constant, brutal combat. First, seizing the bridge at Grave, then thrown into the meat grinder on the Groesbeek Heights, repelling German armor with little more than bazookas and courage. They were utterly exhausted, their jumpsuits stained with the mud and blood of the Netherlands. When told of the mission, the reaction was stunned silence, then disbelief. They were being asked to paddle across 500 yards of open, fast-moving water in broad daylight, using clumsy plywood paddles in boats made of canvas. They had never trained for such a thing. It was a suicide mission, and they knew it. Yet, they prepared. They checked their weapons, stuffed extra ammunition into their pockets, and looked to their leader. Major Cook, a devout Catholic, knelt on the riverbank, calmly praying with his rosary. He knew what was being asked. He also knew the stakes. The entire operation, the lives of the British at Arnhem, rested on his battalion. It was a terrible, impossible burden, but it was theirs to carry. Their desperation was now focused. It had become a cold, hard resolve to cross the river or die in it. The tactical problem was one of geometry and fire. The plan, conceived in haste by General Gavin and the British commanders, was a brutal equation. It relied on overwhelming coordinated violence to briefly suspend reality. At exactly 15 hours, the British XXX Corps artillery and the tanks of the Irish Guards would unleash hell. 200 guns would pound the northern bank. Sherman tanks, hull down on the southern shore, would act as direct-fire artillery, blasting every known German position with high-explosive shells. Simultaneously, they would fire smoke rounds, thousands of them, to create a fragile, shifting curtain across the river. Behind this veil, the first wave of 13 boats, carrying half of Cook's battalion, would launch. There was no finesse. They would paddle straight into the current, straight towards the enemy machine guns. Their only cover was the smoke, and the hope that the sheer volume of suppressing fire would keep the Germans' heads down. The moment they established a foothold, no matter how small, it would be the signal. The Grenadier Guards tanks would storm the southern ramp of the bridge, a frontal assault timed to coincide with the attack from the north. Every piece had to move in perfect concert. If the smoke failed, if the fire support was inaccurate, if the boats were too slow, it would be a slaughter. On the northern bank, SS Brigadeführer Heinz Harmel watched the Allied preparations with professional contempt. His men from the 10th SS Panzer Division were well-rested, well-armed, and dug in. They held the high ground, a series of dikes and embankments that formed a natural fortress. Machine gun nests were sited for perfect interlocking fields of fire across the river's surface. Mortars were already zeroed on the likely crossing points. 20 meters anti-aircraft cannons, depressed for ground targets, were ready to tear the flimsy canvas boats to shreds. To Harmel, the enemy's intention was obvious, and it was absurd. A daylight amphibious assault without proper landing craft was not a tactic found in any military textbook. It was the act of an amateur. He was confident his men could annihilate any such attempt with ease. His primary concern was not the crossing, but the bridge itself. He had personally ensured it was wired with explosives. The detonator plunger was in a command bunker, connected by field telephone to his forward observers. He had his orders. The bridge was not to be captured. At the first sign of an unstoppable attack, he would give the command to blow it. The Americans were not attacking a simple riverbank. They were attacking a fortress commanded by a man who held its destruction in his hand. 3 perspectives, 3 realities, all converging on a single stretch of water at a single moment in time. For the tankers of the British Guards Armored Division, the Wall was a line drawn on a map that had become a physical wall. For 2 days they had been stalled, the immense power of their Sherman and Cromwell tanks neutralized by a single well-defended bridge. They were the tip of the spear, now blunted. Their orders were to get to Arnhem, and they had failed. Now they watched as American paratroopers prepared to pay the price for that failure. From their steel cocoons, the tank crews of the Irish Guards prepared to lay the smokescreen. They were gunners, not magicians, yet they were tasked with creating a veil of temporary safety. The Grenadier Guards checked their machine guns and loaded their main cannons, ready for the desperate charge across the southern ramp. They felt a strange mixture of professional respect and grim apprehension. These were not their men, not their regiment, but their fates were now one. They were about to witness an infantry assault of almost medieval bravery, and their own survival depended entirely on its success. Every tanker knew that if the Americans failed in the water, they would be next, ordered to charge the bridge into the guns of an alerted and victorious enemy. The men of the Royal Engineers, part of XXX Corps, understood the tools of this desperate gamble better than anyone. They were the ones who had hauled the 26 assault boats to the river's edge, wrestling the awkward craft through ruined streets under sporadic mortar fire. They knew each boat intimately. They knew the canvas skin was thin enough to be pierced by a sharp rock, let alone a machine gun bullet. They knew the plywood frames would offer no protection. They knew the paddles were too short and poorly designed for fighting a powerful current. They were engineers, men of calculation and precision, and the math of this operation was horrifying. They had delivered the boats as ordered, but it felt like delivering coffins. They watched as the American paratroopers, men who had fallen from the sky, now prepared to face the water. The engineers could do nothing more. Their job was done. They were now just witnesses to how their equipment, designed for quiet river crossings, would perform in a maelstrom of concentrated German firepower. And in the cellars and shattered upper floors of the buildings lining the riverfront, the people of Nijmegen held their breath. For 4 long years, the wall had been a familiar backdrop to a life of occupation. Now, it was the front line of their liberation. Through cracks in boarded windows and from behind heavy curtains, they watched the impossible scene unfold. They saw the foreign soldiers, the Americans, gathering on the muddy bank. They saw the flimsy-looking boats. The sudden cataclysmic roar of the British artillery barrage was the sound of both terror and hope. It was the sound of their city being torn apart to be set free. For these Dutch civilians, this was not a tactical maneuver or a strategic objective. It was a terrifying, sacred act. Young men from a country thousands of miles away were about to embark on a suicidal journey across their river, for their bridge, for their freedom. For tanker, engineer, and civilian, time itself seemed to slow, condensing into the final agonizing seconds before the order was given. The second hand on a watch ticks past the 12. It is 15 hours, the world erupts. 200 British guns open fire in a single coordinated deafening roar. The sky over the wall is ripped apart by the scream of incoming shells. On the northern bank, the German positions vanish in a rolling wave of high explosives. Earth, steel, and concrete are thrown hundreds of feet into the air. The ground shakes, a man-made earthquake that trembles through the hulls of the British tanks and the foundations of Nijmegen's ancient buildings. Almost simultaneously, the Shermans of the Irish Guards add their voices. Their 75mm cannons fire with a flat, sharp crack, not high explosive, but smoke. Canisters arc across the river, bursting in mid-air or upon impact with the water, releasing thick, billowing clouds of white phosphorus. A screen begins to form, a fragile, shifting curtain designed to blind the enemy. On the muddy southern bank, the order is screamed, "Go!" There is no elegant embarkation. It is a desperate, chaotic scramble. The paratroopers of the 3rd Battalion, 504th, heave the heavy canvas boats. Each one weighs over 400 pounds. The bank is steep, slick with mud. Men slip, fall, cursing as they wrestle the boats towards the water's edge. They are targets. German mortars, firing blind into the smoke, begin to walk their explosions across the launch site. A boat is splintered before it even touches the water. Men disappear in a geyser of mud and shrapnel. Major Julian Cook is at the forefront, shoving his men and their boats into the gray, churning river. The first wave is 13 boats, 13 fragile shells to carry them into hell. As the canvas hulls meet the wall, the current seizes them. It is a powerful, relentless force, far stronger than they anticipated. It grabs the boats and immediately begins dragging them downstream, away from their intended landing zone. The small, clumsy paddles are useless against its grip. The paratroopers dig them into the water, but the boats spin, uncontrollable. They are infantrymen, not boat crews. Panic is a breath away. Men abandon the paddles. They use the butts of their M1 rifles, their steel helmets, their bare hands, anything to propel themselves forward, to fight the current, to cross the 500 yards of open water. They are a collection of desperate, straining men, each stroke a prayer against the river. The smokescreen is not a solid wall. The wind tears gaps in it, creating fleeting windows for the German gunners, and through those windows, they see them. The staccato rip of an MG-42 machine gun cuts through the thunder of the artillery. Then another, and another. From the dikes and embankments on the far shore, the surviving German positions come alive. Tracers, like angry red hornets, zip across the water. They stitch lines across the canvas boats. The sound is like a drum roll on wet fabric. Water spurts through dozens of small holes. The boats begin to founder, to fill with the cold river. Men are hit. A paratrooper, paddling furiously one moment, slumps over the side the next, his helmet rolling into the water. Another screams, clutching a shattered arm. The water inside the boats turns pink, then red. There is no cover, no place to hide. They are utterly exposed, caught between the current and the gunfire. Captain Moffat Burris, in one of the lead boats, watches as the craft next to his simply disintegrates under the concentrated fire of a 20mm cannon. It vanishes, leaving only splintered wood, shredded canvas, and bodies in the water. Of the 13 boats in the first wave, several are already sinking. Men, weighed down by their weapons and ammunition, struggle in the freezing current. Some are pulled under, others are shot as they try to swim. Yet, they keep paddling. Cook, standing in his boat, a clear target for every German gunner, directs his men with hand signals, his voice lost in the cacophony. He points to the far shore, his jaw set. There is no retreat. There is only the other side. They pass the halfway point. The river is a kill zone. Mortar rounds rain down, bracketing the struggling boats with pillars of water. The suppressing fire from the British tanks is relentless, but it cannot silence every German gun. For the men in the water, it feels like hours. In reality, it has been only minutes. Through the smoke and the spray, the northern bank looms closer. It is a vague, dark line, spitting fire. It is 100 yards away, then 50, then 20. The first boats, riddled with holes and nearly swamped, are about to touch land. But the Germans on the dike above are waiting, their machine guns aimed down at the water's edge, ready to slaughter anyone who survives the river. The bottoms of the first boats scrape against the gravel of the riverbed. It is not a landing. It is a shipwreck. Paratroopers leap from the sinking craft into the waist-deep frigid water. They are weighed down, soaked, but they are alive and on the enemy's shore. There is no time for thought, only for violence. They are below the German guns, in a dead zone at the base of the steep embankment. For a few precious seconds, they are shielded. Major Cook is one of the first ashore, his .45 pistol already in his hand. He bellows orders that are swallowed by the din. "Get up the bank! Go! Go!" The paratroopers respond. They claw their way up the muddy 20-foot slope. There are no handholds. They dig their fingers into the wet earth, using bayonets and rifle barrels to pull themselves upward. They are a wave of exhausted, furious men, climbing directly into the muzzles of the German machine guns. The Germans above react, tipping their weapons down, firing in plunging, devastating bursts. Men lose their grip, tumbling back down the slope or into the water below. But for every man that falls, 2 more keep climbing. They throw grenades, blind, over the lip of the embankment. The dull crump of the explosions is followed by screams. They reach the top. The fight becomes a primitive, point-blank struggle. Bayonets, trench knives, rifle butts. A paratrooper and a German gunner wrestle in a muddy trench, their fight ending with the sharp crack of a pistol shot. The Americans are driven by a cold, desperate fury. They had crossed the river of death, and they would not be stopped by the men who had tried to kill them in it. As this savage battle rages on the northern bank, the second wave of boats is already halfway across the wall. Their journey is no easier. They navigate a river now littered with the debris of the first wave, splintered boats, floating equipment, and the pale, upturned faces of their comrades. The German fire, now divided, is less concentrated but still lethal. More boats are hit, more men are lost, but more make it to the shore, adding their weight to the assault, overwhelming one German position after another. On the southern side of the river, the signal is seen. A green flare arcs into the sky from the north bank. It is the sign. The foothold is secure. The engines of 4 Sherman tanks of the Grenadier Guards roar to life. They lurch forward, tracks biting into the asphalt of the bridge ramp. Sergeant Peter Robinson's tank is in the lead. There is no finesse, no tactical maneuvering. It is a cavalry charge, executed with 70 tons of steel. They accelerate down the long, open expanse of the bridge, straight towards the German 88mm and 20mm cannons waiting for them. The German gunners open fire. Armor-piercing shells clang against the Sherman's hulls, some penetrating with a horrific metallic shriek. Robinson's tank is hit repeatedly, but its momentum carries it forward. Inside, the crew is deafened, concussed, but they keep firing their main gun, blasting German positions on the bridge itself. In his command post, Heinz Harmel receives the frantic reports. Americans swarming the northern defenses, British tanks on the bridge. The line is breaking. The moment he feared has arrived. He grabs the field telephone connecting him to the demolition post. The order is given, sharp and clear. "Blow it!" The German sapper at the other end acknowledges. He grabs the handle of the detonator plunger. He pushes it down. Nothing happens. He pushes it again and again. The colossal steel structure, packed with hundreds of pounds of explosives, remains intact. The circuits are dead. Whether cut by a lucky artillery round, severed by the Dutch resistance hours earlier, or sliced by the first desperate paratroopers to reach the northern end, the reason is irrelevant. The bridge stands. On the bridge deck, the surviving paratroopers see the tanks. The tankers see the paratroopers. The Americans, covered in mud and blood, rise from the German trenches they have just taken. The British tanks, smoking and scarred, grind to a halt amongst them. They have met in the middle. The battle for the Nijmegen Bridge is over. The steel giant was theirs, secured by a combination of impossible courage and a single critical failure of an enemy's wires. The silence that follows the storm is unreal. On the northern end of the Nijmegen Bridge, the air is acrid with the stench of cordite, diesel fumes, and death. Mud-caked American paratroopers, their faces masks of exhaustion and shock, stare at the scarred British tanks. The tankers, peering from their open hatches, look back with a kind of awe. There are no cheers, no celebration, just a shared, silent understanding of the violence that has just passed. The objective is taken. The price is now being counted. The Wall River flows on, indifferent, but its surface tells the story. It is littered with the wreckage of the assault, splintered paddles, abandoned helmets, and the dark waterlogged shapes of canvas boats, riddled with hundreds of holes, drift slowly in the current. Some have sunk completely, others bob aimlessly. Their purpose served. On the southern bank, the Royal Engineers count their craft. Of the 26 boats that began the assault, only 11 are recovered in a usable state. The human cost is far greater. The paratroopers of the 3rd Battalion, 504th, begin the grim task of accounting for their own. Major Cook, his arm bleeding from a shrapnel wound, moves among his men, his face grim. They had started the crossing with over 400 soldiers. In the few minutes it took to paddle 500 yards, they suffered nearly 50% casualties. 48 men were killed, over 200 more were wounded or missing, many swept away by the river, their bodies never to be recovered. They lie in the mud of the northern bank, in the waterlogged trenches, or at the bottom of the wall itself. Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, the commander of the British XXX Corps, watched the entire spectacle unfold through his binoculars from the southern shore. He was a veteran of the Great War, a man who had witnessed immense slaughter. But what he saw on the wall left a permanent mark. He would later write, "I have never seen a more gallant action." For the Germans, it was a stunning, localized defeat. Heinz Harmel's SS troops, professionals to the last, had been outfought and overwhelmed by an act of what they considered suicidal madness. The failure of the demolition charges was an inexplicable, catastrophic blow. Their line, so confidently held for 2 days, was now shattered. The survivors fell back disorganized, conceding the bridge and its northern approaches. They had lost a fortress, but in the process, they had bled the Americans, and more importantly, they had bought time. Back on the bridge, the link-up is complete. The airborne carpet is now connected to the armored spearhead, the last great water obstacle before Arnhem is crossed. The road north is open. The paratroopers, having paid a butcher's bill to open that road, look south, expecting to see the immense power of XXX Corps thundering past them, racing to relieve the besieged British at the final bridge. They see the 4 lead tanks that crossed with them. Then they see nothing. The column does not move. The great armored spearhead, for which so much blood had just been shed, remains halted at the southern end of the bridge, its engines idling. The impossible had been achieved, but the victory felt strangely, terrifyingly hollow. That halt was a decision born from the brutal logic of armored warfare. The lead tanks were damaged. Night was falling. The road north of the bridge, known as the Lent Island, was a narrow, elevated causeway flanked by soft ground, a perfect anti-tank trap. The British commanders, products of a doctrine that prized caution, refused to send their armor into a potential killing ground at night without infantry support. But the infantry was still clearing German holdouts in Nijmegen. The momentum, paid for with the lives of American paratroopers, was deliberately sacrificed on the altar of tactical prudence. The price for this caution was paid in the currency of other men's lives 10 miles to the north. In Oosterbeek, on the outskirts of Arnhem, the remnants of the British 1st Airborne were being systematically annihilated. For days, they had held on, waiting for the sound of XXX Corps' guns. Now, their perimeter was shrinking, their ammunition gone, their radios fading. The messages that did get through were desperate. Out of ammunition, God save the King. The delay at Nijmegen was their death sentence. When XXX Corps finally resumed its advance the next morning, it was too slow, too late. German defenses had solidified. The advance was stopped just a few miles short of its goal. The last bridge remained a bridge too far. Operation Market Garden was over. It was a catastrophic failure. The grand strategic gamble to end the war by Christmas had been lost. The Allied war effort was forced to pivot. The seductive idea of a single narrow thrust was abandoned, and Eisenhower's methodical broad front strategy was reaffirmed. The immediate, critical objective became what it should have been weeks before: clearing the Scheldt estuary to open the port of Antwerp. This would lead to another month of brutal, grinding, waterlogged fighting, a battle of attrition that cost thousands of Allied lives. The war would not end in 1944. It would drag on through the mud and snow of a bitter winter, culminating in the Germans' own desperate gamble in the Ardennes. For the men of the 82nd Airborne, the aftermath was laced with a quiet, enduring bitterness. They had performed one of the most audacious and costly assaults of the entire war. They had seized their objectives. They had watched their comrades die in the river to open the road, and then they had watched the tanks stop. The bond between allies was strained, not by malice, but by the friction of different doctrines and the terrible pressures of command. For the Germans, the successful defense of Arnhem was a stunning propaganda victory. It proved the Wehrmacht was not broken. It stabilized the Western Front, granting the Reich precious months to regroup and rearm. Field Marshal Model, who had fled his headquarters in his pajamas just days before, was hailed as the savior of the West. The laughter in the command post overlooking the Waal had been premature, but the ultimate strategic assessment had been correct. The Allied operation had failed. The Nijmegen Bridge, captured at such a horrific cost, became the centerpiece of a new, vulnerable salient, a bulge in the Allied line that would have to be defended all winter. It was a tactical jewel won in a strategic defeat, a monument to unparalleled bravery, and a tombstone for a failed plan. The grand strategy had been defeated. The war would grind on. But what happened on the water that afternoon would be remembered not for what it failed to achieve, but for what it revealed about the men who were there. It revealed that in the cold calculus of war, there are moments that defy calculation. The crossing of the Waal was not a chapter in a textbook on tactics. It was an act of brutal, primal resolve, an instance where the intricate machinery of modern warfare, with its tanks and aircraft and radios, was reduced to a simple, terrifying equation: men in canvas boats against fortified machine guns. The solution was not a new weapon or a clever stratagem. It was the oldest instrument of conflict, human courage, stripped bare of all illusion. The legacy of the crossing is therefore a paradox. It was a stunning tactical success that served a failed strategy. It did not save the men at Arnhem. It did not shorten the war. Its military significance was fleeting, a brief, bloody episode in a much larger defeat. But its human significance is timeless. It stands as a testament to the fact that bravery is not contingent on victory. It exists for its own sake, in the moment a decision is made to act against impossible odds. Today, the bridge at Nijmegen is called De Oversteek, the crossing. Each day at sunset, a lone veteran from the Dutch army walks its length in a slow, measured pace. As he walks, the bridge's 70 streetlights illuminate one by one, a tribute to the 48 American soldiers who died taking it. It is a quiet, daily ritual of remembrance. The Waal River flows peacefully beneath. The laughter of the German generals has long since faded into history, a footnote of misplaced confidence. But the echo of what happened here remains, a reminder that sometimes the only way forward is through the water, propelled by nothing more than the will to cross to the other side, whatever the cost.